you train your kids as best as you can, but then you send them out into the world and they're going to make their own mistakes. Except in this case, you're paid to train your children, and if they make mistakes, you lose your job. So shout out to the coaches. I can't judge, because in the heat of the moment in League of Legends games, I'm the biggest inter of all time. Heat of the moment. Like squirrel, bah, gotta go. Like, doesn't matter what cooldowns I have. I'm like, I can outplay this guy. I'm wrong. Welcome, everybody, to Euphoria Episode 8, just ahead of spring, Week 3. That's the last week of our regular season. As always, we're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud.
And this week, we talked about all things mid-game madness in the LEC, some of the unsung heroes that we thought really popped up over the course of the last couple of weeks, and also then what to expect coming into playoffs and who's actually going to get there.
Yeah, definitely a hard call at this point in the season, but obviously Fnatic and G2 already locked, and they're looking damn good. But to hear more about the rest of the teams, let's just get into it. Welcome, everybody. It's me. It's Rob. We're here to talk about League of Legends.
Boys.
It's the boys vibing.
Yeah.
We've had a good morning this morning. I think that music, we're reminded every day, is such an important part of our life. And no, not just Heartsteel or KDA, but in this case, that old school, that 90s era rap, man. Sometimes it gives you that energy you need to take on the challenges of life.
I hopped into my Uber this morning. I was like in a rush because a parcel arrived in my house right as I went through, so I was completely flustered getting into the car. And this guy was the smoothest man I've ever seen. He just was like, it's chill, it's cool. And then just slams on NWA and then California Love by Tupac and Dr. Dre. I was like, I'm vibing this morning. I was like bopping the entire way in the car.
It's funny how like fragile your mental is early in the morning. Like the littlest things will set you off for the day, but also the littlest things will like bring you life.
Yeah. Set you up for the rest of the day. It's just perfect.
100% feel that vibe today. I'm feeling good, honestly, which you might find surprising if you watch any of our games in week 2, because LEC fans, there are a lot of things to be excited about if you are a fan of a specific team that is doing well. Fnatic fans, don't worry. We are gonna talk so much about how good your boys did this week. They did great. But it's been a hot mess, Rob. And I'm getting scared, Rob, because when I look domestically, I'm like, wow, these games are exciting. You never know who's gonna win. And then I look internationally, I'm like, you never know who's going to win our domestic games, which is like number one red flag. Yeah. This is like worse than that first date where someone spends all their time on their phone level of red flag. You know what I mean? Where they're just not engaged with you. This is that level of red flag.
They've gone to the bathroom. They haven't come back for 20 minutes.
20
You're
minutes.
Really sure what's
You're not
going
really
on.
sure. Like, do they have IBS or are they ghosting me right now? Like somewhere in the middle. And that's kind of my question for you, LEC teams. Do you have IBS or are you just ghosting us? Like, it's just a little hiccup. Is this just, a little poopy gameplay, or is this like, are we just like, and you're going to show up for international? Because we're sending 2 teams, right? And G2 are not above reproach. We saw them lose to Fnatic this week. And again, shout out to Fnatic. But I'm concerned, Rob. I am scared.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. Because like, there are times when it's like, if it's a really competitive domestic game, you're like, hey, look, this is actually 2 teams playing at the highest caliber.
Yes.
And like, you'll see that in other regions where like, this is actually just a straight up banger.
Yes.
But that's not what we're getting. It's like, oh God, why are we throwing what?
Well,
like, this is just a game of dodgeball at this stage.
Yeah. People are getting over eager. And we can talk more about it. Shout out to, I reached out to a couple of coaches. Different coaches gave me their take on like why teams are struggling so much right now to close games. I think it's partially, difficulties in practice, but also it's hard, I think in general, to stay disciplined when you feel like you're in the moment. Everything's going well, everything's working. You feel strong, you feel powerful, you're ahead. And then
I mean, the
instinct takes over, and instinct is a cool thing to talk about. Like, he just trusted his instincts and then he like outplayed them in the fight. But like, that's not really, League of Legends is a math game. You know what I mean?
I didn't realize until right now that what I need is a super edit of the LEC to my man's telling me no. Just all these
body.
It's just like on repeat for all the different moments.
My body's telling me to walk into Adam with no damage as Olaf.
To dive the Nautilus with Aftershock.
One more time. For the people in the back. What if we dove with partial information? What if we just forced the fight and said our hands are better? Which sometimes you gotta, again, respects. But there's some concerns coming out. I will say the other big concern was Smolder. Yeah. Yes, he was hotfixed. It was 20 seconds on the ult cooldown. It was how many extra autos or effective hits he got on his E. We did not think it was going to be enough. Mm-hmm. And Rob, you on broadcast were very insistent that this champion needed to go forever. Here's the exact. If you're in YouTube land, you can watch this. If not, it was in Ready Check on day one. But
or am I
Brock's
just giving his nose a hug? We will never know.
no, yeah. Rob is just furiously jumping up and down in front of a picture of Smolder that is like 10 times his size, just trying to make you forget, like just trying to gaslight us all into thinking this champion doesn't exist for the greater good. As Brock just shakes the camera, which was a great segment. I loved it. Luckily, I feel like most teams took your advice and banned it. Yeah. So I just don't think we have to see it again, hopefully, because my biggest fear would be that this champion is still a problem in playoffs, is still even worse than that would be a problem in MSI, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think it is still a very, very big problem. Like, I think it still looks incredibly strong. I think so a lot of the problems that it still has are still there, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, hey, if I get to enough stacks and I queue your front line, I'm still hitting your back line.
Yeah,
I can really through and guarantee I'm hitting your back line. And it's like, that's the biggest problem, because like when you think of most traditional AD carries, it's, hey, I can only hit front, or I have to put myself in harm's way to get access to your back line.
Yeah.
And Smolder just doesn't have that issue. So he just one-shots the back line. And then say if you've got like an Orianna or something as well that can place the ball and then zone off the back line, it then becomes very difficult for the enemy to play the game. But that's why I was actually pretty impressed with Fnatic, because I think Fnatic played a game that didn't let the G2, when they got the Smolder, to actually set up for team fights.
Yeah.
They were like, hey, look, we're going to attack side lanes. And even like they had lost the initial play. Like there was like that bottom river fight that ended up giving 2 kills to Smolder. And I think everyone kind of went, oh boy, this is where it's going to be Smolder. It's Smolder in time.
Yeah,
but, no, you end up with a position where they're like, hey, if we actually just try and play for side lanes, like we played through our better mid jungle, because they end up with the Poppy and and that was sick, by the way. I mean, shout out to Razork. That man looked insane on the Poppy. The amount of interrupts he got onto Yike or onto the Ahri as well for caps was sick. But it just meant, hey, we actually end up in a position where we can play sides. We don't actually have to fight Smolder. As long as we hit the map away from Smolder and look for picks, Smolder never really gets a chance to set up and like play for fights and like play for that front to back. So he just ends up significantly weaker. So I think Fnatic did a really good job of playing around the Smolder, even though they gave it across.
Yeah, and I think that they absolutely punished G2 in a way that G2 had not really been punished yet. Like this Ahri Lee Sin combo, not into Poppy Talia, but into Talia, is something that G2 had gotten success with before. But I'm glad it got shut down, because on paper, you shouldn't be able to get away with this combo as easily as G2 have in the past. And like, it's just credit to Yike and Caps that they played it so well. But shout out to Humanoid, like little thing that I've seen a lot of mid laners mess up. He like doesn't 100% know where Lee Sin is, but knows that Ahri's coming at him. And this is a mid lane play, probably like 5-6 minutes. It's like one of the first ganks that comes through. He throws down the Unraveled Earth, and then what does he do? He doesn't back up. He walks and puts the Unraveled Earth, the little minefield that interrupts dashes, between him and the Lee Sin once he knows where the Lee Sin is. Because if you watch back on so many of the games where G2, where anyone has gotten away with this Ahri, Lee Sin, and Talia just like panic ease, and then tries to back up, and Lee Sin just like ward hops around the minefield and then kills her. And so little stuff like that is like why this should work, why you should be able to get away with playing this well. Just like, it's obvious when you think about it, but we've seen a lot of players fumble those small mistakes. And there's a world where like Humanoid does give up, a couple kills early, and this game gets a lot harder, but instead we essentially get, full court press. Noah's KDA, I think Noah wasn't a significant part of this win. Don't get me wrong, he played his role well. Yeah. But Oscar, topside, solo dominating Broken Blade is the icing on the cake. I don't even think they needed that, to be completely fair. Like, they definitely they couldn't afford to feed BB, but they didn't need BB to be like wildly far behind. But, that was great from Oscar, especially because his performance has been kind of all over the place. I would say this entire year. I felt like
Oscar needed that more so than like Fnatic as a group needed, because that you're getting counterpicked. That's a terrible matchup. Gwen should, in theory, absolutely destroy you. And like when I saw him rip BB out from underneath the turret, I just beat him down over the sidewall. I was like, all right, Oscar, your confidence is like through the roof right now. This is where I think he needs to be, is just like get those little wins to rebuild his confidence. Because as you say, it hasn't been the best of splits for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's just been inconsistent, right? Like there was the game where Razork is like living topside and he's so far ahead individually, but he's not really able to do much with his lead. And I'm still like, it is sometimes tricky to really hard force as Renekton, and maybe he didn't feel really empowered to do that in that game, but that was concerning. And then there are a lot of games where he just got blown out of the water, especially when we look back to last playoffs, right? Like it has been, we've seen peak Oscar, and right now very often that is coming on Cassante. So, we'd like to see it on more champions as well. But it's good to see that come up against G2, because it's really easy to get comfortable in the idea that LEC is G2 and everybody else. And when someone challenges G2 in a way that looks so dominant, it's like, yes, finally. Because it's good for G2 too. It's good for the league, right? I want two teams that are fighting neck and neck. I don't want this like one team G2, and G2, exactly, they're already qualified to MSI. So they have the right to be like, frankly, this is just like a speed bump for us. We just want to clean up our play as much as possible, go to MSI. But I don't want them to be comfortable in that mindset. I want them I want for every team in our league to be like, oh, we want to think about international, but if we don't focus on the team right in front of us, we're going to lose. That like our league shouldn't be a speed bump for anybody. And I think Fnatic helping remind G2 that, if you get sloppy, you can't just say, oh, we're going to control waves better in mid game and trust that every other team is just going to biff,
Yeah, and I had a conversation last night because with Veteran Don Jake, and Veteran was actually talking about this, where it's like, it feels like we're actually having teams that have like certain styles that are reminding teams that they have to clean up parts of the game. And he's talking about like specifically like Mad Lions Koi coming in. It's like, hey, look, this is a team that wants to play off of, we will push bot, we will push mid, and we will invade with our jungle early. And we haven't really seen a team that really plays for jungle like that in a while. And I think it's like super interesting to see that like, oh, well now G2 are actually struggling against this a little bit. Or like Heretics the first week that Mad Lions Koi brought out this style, they got completely blasted by it. 100%. I think it's a lot of teams going, oh wait, we've actually been so focused on, hey, we want to try and clean up like mid-game, or like we want to try and clean up how we dive. But now our jungler is actually getting attacked and we don't really know what to do. So it's another aspect of the game that you have to try and bring back. So I think it's really interesting to see like how these different styles are actually exposing a lot of the teams that have kind of got comfortable in that mindset of, hey, we can take it slow in the early game and just play for big late game moments.
Yeah, I think that kind of the two most obvious indicators of that, maybe three if you want to include G2 too, but it's like it is MDK and it's BDS, right? Because like BDS even now start to fall back on scaling, maybe definitely more than I would like them to, but I can't fault them because oftentimes it works because teams are so messy in closeout and so inconsistent on pushing their leads. And the other one is obviously MDK, who were willing to fight and get super aggressive at all stages of the game, who would, especially in winter, just shit on you. They would just style on you. They would just embarrass you in these skirmishes and push advantages that I think teams get lost in the turn-based rules of League of Legends sometimes. And when people break those rules, they get really caught off guard. Also, a lot of times in mid-game, our own teams just forget the rules and are just like, what are the rules? Why are these important? And just like absolute brain off, which I think is maybe one of the problems is why teams are struggling to close games. But yeah, I like that there are teams that are going to push and contest and expose that.
But I think it's also like, yes, there's Mad Lions Koi do it early game, right? But if you look at like Fnatic versus G2, right? Yeah. Fnatic were like, hey, we've got a Talia. We're going to like play with this Talia and to shove mid, try and collapse onto side lane and find a pick, right? Yeah. I think a team that does that as well now is, well, maybe it's not a team that does it now. But
it's kind of also a meta thing, right? With a lot of these champions for sure.
Yeah. Well, I was also just going to say like, it's just Trimby. Trimby does this on whatever team he goes to. It's like, hey, you know what sounds great right now?
If we just like bot lane
drop a lane, play off of 2 lanes, and everyone except for our top laner goes to the top lane and just collapses on someone, like overload one part of the map. And I think this is a good way of catching out teams that like skip steps when it comes to, hey, we want to try and play it through side lanes and stuff like that, right? I think it's really interesting to see that there are like different barriers essentially to how you want to play the game. It's like, are you messing up your timers on like pushing mid into collecting size? Okay, cool. Well, now you're going to get punished, right? By Team Heretics. Are you not setting up your vision control correctly? Okay, now this humanoid Talia is going to punish you because you're now getting caught out without the correct vision defensively. And it's like, I think there's a lot of like little things like that are why we're starting to see more and more exposure of these teams. It's like, hey, these are problems that you have. It's just that this team now exposes you, that team now exposes you, and you're getting all these different parts of your game that you haven't had to think about before.
Yeah, and I think that like I'm curious to see in kind of the short time that we have between now at the end of the split and MSI, how quickly teams can develop. Because I think that is one of the things that's really tough about our format is it is always kind of an arms race. And a lot of the times, if you're at the top of the table, you're in a privileged position where you can focus on bigger picture issues. And I think if you're not, it's kind of like Band-Aid. What can we slap together for the next week to like in pick ban? Maybe it's scaling, maybe it's, whatever it is, whatever your issues are, trying to solve those, not by, figuring out the core problem, but by addressing like the symptoms rather than the root cause, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the problem is like, when I look at say Heretics, right? I think it is sick that they have this playbook that Trimby brings, right?
Yeah.
But I actually think their team fighting is kind of weak. So it's like, are you doing this because it's a good play, or are you relying on this because you don't feel like you can trust your team fighting particularly well. So you look for picks in a side lane rather than taking a big on team fight, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where like BDS always get exposed against G2 because BDS are very good at, hey, we're going to play for a big team fight. We're going to set up the objective well. But we kind of forgot about our top lane and crap. Now BB is pushing it and we kind of scramble across the map and now we're losing stuff, right? And G2 are more willing to cross map and okay, now we're not getting those team fights and suddenly we're falling apart, we're behind and now we can't team fight as well, right? So I think it's like how much of this is a band-aid, as you say, to get to playoffs versus, hey, we're going to take a hit for the next couple of weeks and try and like fix this. And that's what I thought BDS were doing. Like, I think that's why when we look at BDS down the standings, I was like, oh, this is a team that needs a bit of time to test stuff, to try and get better, but like take Talia's, play for side lanes, try and find these moments where you can look for picks. But it feels like now they've kind of gone back to, oh crap, we want to really make sure we get playoffs. So we're going to go Psy on top and we're going to just go for team fights again.
I'm how to describe it really quickly before we go deeper into BDS, because I think this is an important discussion. If you haven't watched Fnatic G2, please watch it. It's an absolute banger. Yeah. It's a really thrilling game. It's Fnatic the only game where we've seen a Smolder get that many stacks and not win. Mm-hmm. And that Smolder was Hans Hama. Yeah. Like, if he wasn't playing poorly, I think Fnatic just played really well and didn't give G2.
Yeah, it was really smart from Fnatic.
Yeah, I think they played really well. And I'm not going to say that they played perfectly. There probably were windows of opportunity where they could have pushed the game further, but that's really nitpicky. I think across the board, it was like a really good game from Fnatic, and they deserve that credit for taking down G2. Honest win. It wasn't like G2 caught asleep at the wheel.
I mean, good draft, good answer to the mid jungle from the early scene.
Yep.
Good opportunities to find those moments to punish when G2 were over-aggressing or like not respecting Fnatic. And then Fnatic, when they got to the mid game, like really good usage of the Talia. So, yeah.
Bringing it back to BDS, kind of talking about some of the other teams that I think we expected. I would say we expected more from. I think BDS are on that list. I think Mad Lions Koi are on that list right now. Yeah. As we talk about some of the teams that are kind of maybe not meeting our expectations. I think the thing that concerns me for BDS is there was a pretty frank interview with Stryker that we did on broadcast, and I can't remember what day, and he's like, no, we're aware that we're like over-reliant on playing like one thing. Yeah. And we want to branch out. But you can see when the chips are down, they just go back to it. And I understand that because you need the wins and you need to secure playoffs and you need to get as far as you can, right? Like the ability to take a step back from what you need on a weekly basis to look at the bigger picture is absolutely a privilege that only teams at the top of the table can even begin to think about. And even then, if you take a step too far back, right? Like we saw SK in Winter, right? Like week 1, they were like 3-0, right? And then they just like bombed. So clearly you still have to be in it, right? You don't just get to forget about what's right in front of you. But like, I feel like the development arc of BDS has been stunted, and they'll go back to this and they'll find success, and that's great for them. But when we look at like, if you're a BDS fan or you want to see more from this team and you want to see them develop, you've seen Nuke get better, you've seen Ice fit in well. Lebrov's kind of grieving a bit. Sorry, Lebrov, you've had that was pretty shit week 2. That was pretty rough. The blitz pick in week 1 too, also not great. But other than that, but previously LeBron's been great, right? Sorry, I just didn't want to say that like everything's going well. Exactly, like there are clearly some problems, but there are clear like points of improvement that you wanted. You know, Ice came in, looks great. Nuke is looking better, but does it matter if you're only going to play? Like, are you going to brute force with individual skill to make sure that playing this one style isn't a massive liability as you get deeper into the tournament? No, right? Yeah. Like individual skill isn't going to overcompensate for that.
Well, I think that's why, like. I said it on day 3, I think it was, in the split on the analyst desk. It's like, I would rather see BDS lose in the fashion that they are than win by going back to the style that they now have. Like, their initial draft was like, oh yeah, we're going to bring out the Talia. They were going to bring out, I can't remember what the other one was. There was another draft that they picked something that was a little bit funky on day 2 as well. But yeah, so first day was the Poppy, Talia, Aatrox. And I was like, oh, sick. They're trying to play for side lanes. They're going to try and like get this advantage for Nuke in the mid lane. They're going to try and put him in a side, and they're actually going to try and look for picks and stuff. And this was a very clear of, hey, we want to try and look for a different identity, which is not playing for team fights. Like obviously Talia can play for team fights, but it's like, hey, we actually want to try and move away from that and try. And you could even see in the way they set up the map, they were trying new things. And I was like, sick. I would rather see you lose the next 3 games learning how to play that style than just falling back into, hey, we're going to play for team fights. But as it went on, like you could see there was the last couple of drafts are just like Sion, Zeri, AD card, late game skill AD carry with Zeri, Cassante top, Oriana mid, Nico mid, Aphelios
More
bot. It's
Aphelios,
you're
more
going team
Aphelios.
fight,
Which
yeah.
I'm going to sucker for Aphelios, and I think Ice is really good, so I do like watching that. But yeah, I think it's also we have to check some of our perception at the door in the sense that like there are obviously scrim games that happen every week, and that's the majority of the games that teams play, right? And it's in our format, remember, because it's 3 days broadcast, 1 day off usually for teams, and then 3 scrim days. Like they have those 3 scrim days between every week to try to learn something new. And this is something that came up when we were reaching out to coaches to talk about teams struggling to close. It's like it has always been hard and probably always will be hard to get good mid to late game, practice. And that's hurting a lot of teams. I still don't think that like saves BDS, but I just want to give them the benefit of the doubt that it's like it is hard in our format, especially compared to like the much longer regular season of like an LCS, to make meaningful change to your team strategy without like tanking your split, right?
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna be frank. Scrims are great. We've heard every player say, look, nobody really takes scrims seriously, right? I think that's the biggest issue, is that the culture that we have at the moment is that when you get to mid to late game in your scrims, chances are the team is already reset or called it a day, or the game is such a bloodbath that it doesn't really matter. You don't get the proper practice that you would like in that mid to late game.
Yeah.
And I think that's why realistically you have to use stage time to a certain extent as this practice time, because that's the only time when you don't have teams going crazy in the early game or trying to like make the big play that then gives you the massive lead, right?
Undermine LEC here, but LEC regular season is the greatest practice time you will get because your scrims are pretty much guaranteed to not be good.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I think if you're a team like BDS that is like can turn it on, like you've seen it just go, hey, we will take like literally what they're doing at the moment, right? Which is, hey, we're just going to fall back into team fights. Now they did lose to Heretics, but they're like, okay, time to turn it back on. They go back against Rogue, SK, and Giant X and go, cool, team fight, lads. Yeah, let's team fight. And then they just go, they'll play for Dragons again. Like if you look at the first week, I think their first Dragon was taken, like this is a number I'm pulling out my ass, by the way, but it's like 8 to 10 minutes into the game, which is like
got it. Entirely real number. Yes.
But it's significantly later because like they would have been on point, which is at 5 minutes, we take first Dragon. By 23 minutes, we have 3 dragons and we're pushing.
And you will come fight us.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly,
and you will come fight us, and we will Thunderdome you with a scaling comp. Yeah.
And it was a very clear game plan that they had, but they forgone that for, hey, we're going to try and play for sides. So we're going to play for void grubs. We're going to like try a different case. So, but I think that's why it's like you actually do have to use stage time a little bit more. And I know you wanted to get into it a bit more, Drakos, but like in a little bit, but it's like, I think that's why. I
think we're all over the place. I've just accepted.
Yeah,
we're both vibing. And now we have a list of topics and we both, the first thing I did was undermine my own list of topics. So you take script. God, take us where you want to go.
But I think that's why our mid games are actually a big issue in Europe at the moment, is because like I don't think you get proper practice in a lot of situations with scrims to actually like play out a mid game that seems somewhat close to what a stage game is, where it's like it's not a 5 to 6k gold lead, it's a 2k gold lead and we have a tower advantage. It's like, okay, how do we play this out?
Well, and I think that as easy as it is for us all kind of as spectators to this process to say, well, players just need to take practice more serious, but like it really is a hard thing to replicate, right? Like the difference of you practicing, a speech at home in front of your friends versus having to give it in front of 100 people, the difference, like it's always going to be different. And the practice does help and it does matter. But in this case, it's significantly different, right? Because ultimately you feel more comfortable, you feel more empowered to take risks because there's nothing on the line. And I can tell you, hey, you need to treat this like a stage game, but it's not. It's not that simple. Like people just we like to pretend that like shifting your mindset on things is just like this. Oh, you just think like, oh, don't be sad.
Switch.
Yeah, just don't be sad. It's like it's the same thing. It's like, oh, just don't be like bold or aggressive, or like on stage you're like play like you did in scrims, play with no fear, and it's like it's the same thing, right? Like that transition between those two different environments is really tricky, and there are teams that tried to take big steps to like make their practice environment similar to their stage environment, like similar setup, similar process, so that there is some sense of familiarity. I'm not a sports psychologist. I'm not going to tell you how well that works or doesn't work, but it's clearly not solved. And I just want to be clear, it's not an easy thing to solve. It's not as simple as all of us at home going, LEC makes scrims better, and we like sign a petition with 1,000 10,000, a million signatures. Who cares? And it's just solved. Like it is a really hard problem to figure out.
Yeah, but I do think it ends up leading itself into, if we get to a mid game, how do we try and fight or combat that, right? Or what do we try and push for? I think a great example of that was Rogue, right? Rogue had this massive Callista on comp, and you're like, oh, cool, they're going to be able to like play for invades off of comp, like push mid.
He's going to get prio. Prio's going to get vision. He's going to get prio again. Vision is going to get more control or kills or objectives.
Yeah, and then it's just like, wait, they've assigned the lane wrong, so comp isn't really in mid lane, so they can't really play off him as well as they want to, and they're not really getting the pressure they need top because their mid lane slightly behind, and then it's just like, it all just starts to fall apart. And I think that's where the big issue is like, getting this practice isn't great. And I think that's why G2 in a lot of senses have this like get out of jail free card
in their mid
because they've been to international so often that they've kind of had to practice this mid game against really teams that are significantly better than them at the mid game. And I think you end up in a position where it's like, okay, we have had the practice where we've learned on stage what works and what doesn't work just because of the number of games we've had internationally. Well, and then they get to bring that back and kind of slap people around.
And even without the international experience, it's the same exact lineup with the same exact coaching staff.
Yeah.
And players with enough veterancy that they have spent the vast majority of their careers in the same boat that a lot of our younger players are in now, which is they probably just practiced early game for like 5 years like everyone else does, because that's what you can scrim. That's what's reliably scrimmable is early game. Set plays, early game, etc. And so like they have the breadth of experience there that like they will need to focus on it at some points, as we saw. Like the early game's obviously not flawless, right? In fact, I would go so far as to say, well, their mid-game focus has been justified. Like
it's got a bit.
You can call it a trap card, or you can call it a crutch, and I think both would be correct. And again, their mid-game is flawless, and I think credit to their coaching staff for really. I think from my discussions with them, and I don't talk to every coaching staff, so I don't want to assume that other coaching staff isn't doing this. I've just known the G2 coaching staff for a while, but they have a very clear, concise vision of what they want to be doing in the mid-game and how they should be playing mid-game in a way that I haven't necessarily heard coaches be able to verbalize quite as well. So there's a lot of things going for G2 in that regard. I do want to bring up the biggest throwers of all time. Professional baseball pitchers, SK Gaming. God damn, this is so sad because they're not so good early game. They still fumble some early games, but they're pretty damn good. They're pretty consistent in getting leads. Just a recap in case you missed it. SK versus BDS, they threw a 7.4K gold lead. SK versus Team Heretics, they threw a 3.1K gold lead. Countless other throws that weren't indicated by gold, so weren't as easy for me to just snip out of the stats, or for Adea, in this case, shout out to Adea who found those stats for me, snip them out. They were doing really bad. Swiffer talked about it at the end of our show on the last day, but I asked him for like a formal EUphoria quote, and I'll kind of just read parts of that to you now from Swiffer, talking about why our LEC team's struggling to close out with these huge leads. And he said, I can only speak for ourselves. It's a combination of a couple things. It all ties back to how effective your practice is and what level of confidence you play with. If we don't understand our win conditions well enough, how to sync on executing them, or understand how variables can change that win con, then you have games that look disjointed. For most teams, there's 18 practice games, and when a decent amount of them are either one team giving up or another team has a lead or the inverse, it's really hard to practice closing games. I'm paraphrasing a bit just to get through this because he gave me a very, very long answer, but there's a lot of extra stuff in there. He said, our best game and arguably our biggest throws against BDS, as the weekend went on, that self-belief, that confidence we had in the first game started wavering. By the third game of the weekend, you could tell that there were more split calls, more indecision, and that fog of war was darker. Really, he wants the team to be able to rely on habits, and you hope that you kind of built up enough in training for it to come through, but you see that. And I think that that's the other thing that's really tricky is like, let's say, like confidence is obviously such a big part of it. We talked about this earlier with BDS, how like we want them to change what they're doing and how they approach. But the struggle there is like if you win on your new strategy and you gain confidence in it, you're probably more likely to execute it well in the days to come. But in this case, for SK, let's say mid-game, late game is their issue and they keep throwing these games. If you throw and you get another lead, there's going to be the voice in your back of your head. There's going to be this uncertainty. And even if you've talked about it, even if you figured it out, I feel like it's really hard to solve that issue. That said, SK right now are on the road to be the biggest tragedy of spring split, because I feel like obviously there was winter last year, which looked pretty good. And then they kind of had a rough patch, and winter this year was up and down. But they've looked really good with Niski. Niski especially has looked fantastic. Niski and
I was gonna
Isma have
say,
looked
Niski's
great.
been amazing.
Niski's been great. In some of those games, Niski is the sole reason they've looked as good as they did. With some maybe less obvious supporting actors, but Niski obviously the really clear one. But as much as I like really feel for Swiffer and I really appreciate the answer that he gave, it's like, God damn, you guys have a week to sort this shit out, because right now SK are my inverse G2. Where like G2 you believe it, you don't like, and this is part of the reason why G2 got so much credit in the Fnatic game and it felt closer, is it's not just Smolder, but it's Smolder for G2, right? So you kind of in the back of your mind, you're like, oh shit, do they find a way back in? Do they find a way back in? And now I have the exact opposite with SK, where I'm like, all right, they're 5K up.
Do I believe they can close?
I don't really care whose nameplates are on the other side at all. I'm like, can they just end the game? Right? Like it feels like Rogue time from back in the day, where you're just like, it's coming. They're going to find a way to throw it, because that BDS game was unlosable. Mate, you had to craft that loss. Like someone looking to script the perfect throw would have said, nah, no one will believe that. Like that's not believable. There's no way they split completely with no summoner spells, walk into an Olaf with their carries in the wrong position, and just instantly throw when all they had to do was wait 30 seconds for their sums to come back up. There's no way. There is no way anyone would make that mistake. But they did, Rob. And it's like, and I get it. I can't judge, because in the heat of the moment in League of Legends games, I'm the biggest inter of all time, right? Like and part of the reason I'm not a pro player is because I just like heat of the moment, like squirrel, bah, gotta go. Like doesn't matter what cooldowns I have. I'm like, I can outplay this guy. I'm wrong every time. But at the same time, it's like that doesn't. Well, I'm empathetic to the situation or sympathetic to the situation. It's like that is catastrophic. That was a catastrophic throw.
And then they followed up gracefully with a Carmine Corp win. Which, I'm not gonna lie, that game broke me. That game was.
Which, if you didn't watch KC versus SK, please watch it, because again, it's a banger. Not in the same way that G2 Fnatic was,
but it's not even for the first like 15 minutes.
Nothing happens.
And
it was so
pure
passive.
Chaos. Pure chaos.
I'm still reeling from that game. I forgot that game existed. There was like this lingering like negative emotion holding in my back in my body that I was just holding on to, this weight, and now I can finally put into words what it is, and it's Carmine Corpus.
I cast that game with hysterics, and I was like, what in the name of God is happening? Like the entire way through, I was like, hey Kate, we're in a decent spot here, SK. You'd be totally fine to close this one out. And then the surprising part to me was Irrelevant just ran it. Where Irrelevant was just like, the team is over that way, way over on the left-hand side of the screen. And then Irrelevant is way over on the right-hand side of the screen trying to 1v4. And I was like, what is going on with this team?
And
Has no one said anything?
This is the Swiffer thing, I think, where like confidence is probably shot and the calls are split, and Irrelevant believes in that moment that he's got the angle and maybe makes that call in isolation. And you don't hear comms, so I'm not going to speculate too much. But clearly not everyone was on the same page, or if they were, it was a really shitty page. Yeah. Really poorly written page, like bad Harry Potter fanfic level of poorly written. Yeah. You know what I mean? But like it's kind of, it really erodes your faith in SK in a way that I hope that they don't let it get to them. Like, I don't think we can, as pundits, not call that shit out, because it's like really bad. It's really, really bad. Right. But at the same time, I really hope that they can turn this around, because there were so many things that I was excited about. Yeah. DOS on Renata looks good. Looks really good. And their bot lane's been up and down over the course of the split, but I like DOS on Renata. I think Niski and Isma look fantastic together. Irrelevant, obviously, is a brick house on the top side of the map. This man is doing work every game. But if you can't close, who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem. It's like, I don't care if you look like Rookie and the Shy. If you're not winning games, well, you look like the Shy still. But like, catching strays.
Man doesn't even play anymore. He's catching strays.
That's his job now. He catches strays. Actually, sad. Sorry, the Shy. You didn't deserve that. But yeah, it's rough. And I wish I could say the SK are the only ones in this boat. But I think the other team is Mad Lions Koi.
Yeah.
Where they're doing well, they're building leads, and I think that it feels more clear to me what's going wrong for them. And I don't know how you feel about it, but I just feel like individual members keep getting caught.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, and I think that's the main issue with Mad Lions Koi is like you'll see them set up, they've got a lead, and then suddenly like Supa gets caught out of position and he's taken out. Like it not even like if you're setting up for a team fight, it could be he's overextended on bot lane and suddenly gets caught out. Or
Mirwin multiple
same,
times, Frescowie on LeBlanc in that game where they were 5k up. Like there are so many instances where, and I have not done a deep dive on this team, but I would be curious to go back and look at Winter and see how many times they're in a similar position and they just weren't punished. So, or how much of this is just new behavior? You know what I mean? Like, were we, because of their success, maybe ignoring more in the fact in Winter that they were skipping steps, or were they just cleaner in Winter? But I'm inclined to believe that probably teams are just getting better at punishing them because playing, the line between aggressive and over aggressive isn't just like, is it successful? It's like, is the value proposition good? And I think that they got away with a lot of 50-50s on like the value proposition, like the input and output are the same. Like you lose this, you win this, and it's the same thing. It's not like you're gambling super effectively. The odds aren't in your favor. They're just dead even, right? And now it's like, now they're just making plays that just feel like really bad
I think it's twofold. So I think it's one, teams are getting better at identifying how Mad Lions Koi want to play the early game. And I think actually like the one that always like stuck out to me was actually their second last game, their Carmine Corp game.
Yeah.
Because if you go back and watch at the first like 6-7 minutes, the vision control that Carmine Corp has is all hyper defensive. It is like, we are going to spot where Elyoya enters our jungle. We know he's coming into our jungle and we're going to respond to that, right? And it meant that they were really well set up when I think it was like 4 or 5 minutes into the game, they tried to go for a bot lane dive. And they were like, no, we know this is coming. We're going to be able to respond to it and we're all going to be fine, right? And then Carmine Corp were able to slow down the pace of the game. And I think that then lends itself to, we don't actually have as big of a gold lead coming out of the early game as we used to. Because Mark, if you think back towards Winter, it'd be like big dives bot lane or massive outplays bot lane. And suddenly Supa's huge and they're able to like do whatever they want.
Yeah.
But I think now because you don't have that massive lead, teams are able to go more aggressive because they're like, we aren't as behind and we're able to like this risk isn't really as big of a risk as if we were like 3-4k goal behind. But also you just don't have the gold to outplay it anymore. Because a lot of the times when we think of Mad Lions Koi is these big outplays, whereas like, we've like 2v3 bot lane or whatever it is. But now they just don't have that opportunity to turn the play around anymore because they just don't have as much gold or as much resources to do it. So I think it's definitely kind of been like a twofold problem for them. And now coming into it, it's like, hey, well, we're getting to a position where it is skipping steps, as you pointed out, but we're just getting caught out in positions where teams wouldn't have threatened us before because they were further behind or we had more resources to turn around a potential play if they went for it.
That kind of makes sense. I like how you kind of connected the dots there. I'm curious. Definitely some of it, like, it's not like their mid game was flawless. It felt like it got better towards the end of Winter, right? It definitely was never perfect. And I think that was the area where G2 pretty much always was going to outmatch them in the finals, even though MDK did get that one pretty good win. And also the final game, Supa and Alvaro 2v2, still a force to be reckoned with. But I think that it compounds on itself. When your mid game's already a little bit shaky, and you're used to entering the game or entering the mid game with like 4K gold leads or 2K individual leads in lane and kind of playing around that player, obviously it shuts down your plane a little bit. I still feel like the team is pretty good in their early game, maybe less explosive, probably because teams are giving them a bit more respect and cleaning up just some early game stuff that definitely Mad Lions Koi were punishing. Because there are a lot of games in Winter where they're just like, we know we're stronger. Let's fight. Yeah, exactly. 4v4. And the enemy team's like, are we stronger? And then they're like, while they're asking that question, they're already dead. They've already lost the skirmish, right? So I don't know. It's hard for me because when we talk about who are the actual best teams in our league, at the end of Winter, it was like KC, G2, Fnatic. Pretty easy, right? And G2 and Fnatic still feels pretty true, but third, who's next in line, feels very, very unclear to me.
Mad Lions Koi rather than KC.
Mad Lions Koi. Sorry.
I was like, wait.
Yeah, KC, third best team. You like that? French people, that was for you. That was called bias. There's no evidence to support that opinion. Just fandom. Just a big fan. Yeah, just, can't help myself. Can't help but talk about KC. As a side note, that game from KC was great. The rest of the week was a bit rough. But Targamas and Saken especially deserve mad props for that game. Bo had a pretty good weekend as well. But just shout out to Saken and Targamas for that specific game. That game looked crisp. Those two together were doing absolute work. But back onto the topic of who actually is good, who our actual best teams are. With Mad Lions Koi kind of falling down and still looking pretty sloppy despite being able to showcase some of their strengths. it's G2, it's Fnatic, and then it's like, do I believe in Team Heretics or Vitality? I don't really know how to feel about both those teams, Rob. Tell me how to feel, Rob. You're the expert in this context.
For Vitality, it's like, do I believe in Photon? Yes. Do I believe in the rest of this team? God, no. I don't know what to expect with Vitality ever. It's like, I think the games where they've looked the cleanest is like Photon's Rumble. Absolutely sick. There was another game where Photon popped off. Can't remember who he is on, but when Photon gets these leads, he looks absolutely spectacular. And I think the team follows pretty well. Maybe it's the Gwen game. But it does feel like, other than that, they're still not really sure how they want to approach team fights. Like, people are getting caught out in lanes and stuff like that. And also, like, when they try to move around the map, especially with like the Senna, does look a little bit funky to me at times. But it feels like every so often they'll just show up and have like great games. Like the TF80 carry game looked really, really cool. Where it's like, hey, we're looking for these little picks. We can play for these fights. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, there's no real consistency to this team. And I mean, even, I think it was to you I was saying, I was like, the first time I saw the Senna Nautilus, I was like, Senna Nautilus is actually like a sick pick.
The most big brain pick ever. You're a coach and you're sitting there and you're like, all right, we figured it out. We know how to like mental ninjutsu Hilly out of dying so much. And it's like, guys, we just really think that Senna shouldn't farm. It actually should be the Nautilus.
Yeah, if you just sit there,
it's really just good. Like, yeah, Hilly, if you're just forced to catch waves and there's like, you have to spend 60% more of your time not leaving lane.
And not dying in river. That would be great.
It's worked. Not every, like, there's still some Hilly moments, but it's like, it's the most five-head play I've ever seen in coaching history. There was this moment where I was at Team Scrims, and there was this coach that was trying very hard to like convince his jungler that he couldn't play Nidalee, which wasn't allowed, but he had to do it in a way to like protect the ego. Yeah. And maybe he wasn't. Maybe he just actually felt this way. But to me, in the moment, I was like, "Oh my god, you were trying to dance around this so hard." And he's just like, "Yeah, I just think that like." The rest of the team doesn't really know how to support you, and like really try to make it like it's like this gentlest pair. Like, I have so much respect for coaches who can dance around the ego and like, because we just really feel like when you play things like Jarvan, you're just like able to communicate, and we really value that communication that comes out from you. And it was just like,
that's incredible.
But it's like, I don't know if Hilly needs that. I've never taken Hilly as a guy who's like a big ego.
Yeah.
So I assume in the case of Mad Lions, they know what they're doing, and it's less about Hilly hinting, and they do just believe it's better.
Yeah.
But maybe you just gotta steer him. You gotta gently steer him in the right direction. Yeah. Maybe if you have to catch waves, you can't die.
Yes, but I do think it's still like, oh well, he gets dove, and that's the other side of the coin, right?
Yeah,
where it's like
he does.
If Vitality end up falling behind, oftentimes they just don't end up protecting Hylissang in the same way. And I think it's the eternal discussion of, hey, if an AD carry is playing support because they're playing support Senna, do they understand their roam timings as well? Do they understand how to read the map as well? Because let's be real, half the time they're like, AFK brain, I kill minion under tower. Why do I need to think? You think, you save me, I don't go save you. But now the roles are reversed. So I think it is a lot of like takeaways and learnings. And I'm not saying that Carzzy doesn't roam at times. It's just a case of like, when they start to fall behind, you can see there's less of that, hey, I can read that chances are they're going to go and dive bot, or I need to be topside here because that's where they're going to try and overload because maybe, I don't know, Void Grubs are coming up or Rift Herald's coming up, wherever it might be, right? And I think it is those small timing windows that are getting punished. But yeah, I think it's a case of, hey, if Photon can get these massive leads, fantastic. And if they can keep control of the mid jungle, it becomes significantly easier. But I haven't been fully convinced. And I think that's always been the problem with Vitality, is that they have just been so inconsistent. It kind of feels like you're coin flipping most days as to what side comes out.
Yeah, and I don't want to say like all of their games are, it's not that their games are coin flip, it's just you don't know what level of performance you're going to get from them, right? They feel unreliable. Yeah. Like if you tell me Vitality are in our finals, I can believe it. If you tell me Vitality missed playoffs at this point, I wouldn't, because they're high enough up that it seems like there's no way. But if you tell me they get knocked out in the first round, that also wouldn't surprise me, right? And I think that it's, I reached out to Mac a while ago to kind of get his take on this, and I'll follow up with him again to just see how he feels now that he's here with the team, because I do think that Vitality are improving, but I feel like there has always been a thing with Mac and pad teams where they're like really high highs and really low lows. And I wonder if it's like their approach that leads them to this, where they're more willing to experiment, more willing to try stuff. Because I will say, like, while we talk about, they're like the opposite problem of like a BDS, right? Where it's like, Mad will try stuff.
Yeah.
But the stuff will blow up in their face, right? And they're kind of like both at different extremes of just like crazy all over the place performances, you know, some really high highs and some really lows. Like, whereas like BDS are kind of just constantly trucking along with a style that we would like them to move away from. Yeah, and I just don't feel confident in Vitality yet.
Yeah.
And I feel bad because usually feel that way about Hylissang teams. But no, I actually didn't feel that way about Fnatic back in the day. So I think it's just this particular cocktail of players that makes me uncertain.
But I think that's it. Is like Video, you never really know what you're getting. Like some days he has some incredible plays, other days it doesn't really work out. I still think Daglas is trying to find his footing as well. Like he looked great last split when he got his hands on the brand. This split, kind of a mixed bag. Like it's not really like he's there to help fix waves for his team. He tries to play around bot lane a little bit sometimes, but when they're playing like the Senna Nautilus, they're kind of moving away from it, so it all ends up a little bit funky. So yeah, I'm less convinced by them, but I do think it's like comes down to kind of Heretics and honestly like what BDS can pull out for like the other top team, because I do think like BDS have been experimenting. So I'm kind of more on the side, erring on the side of, hey, they'll bring it back for playoffs, where it's like, look, you've had a couple of games trying to try out this style because you're trying to improve, but you'll go back to team fighting and it'll actually look fine. And then I think for Heretics, I think against teams like G2 and Fnatic, they will always struggle because these are teams that understand how to force a fight. And I don't think Heretics as a team have really figured out how they want a team fight.
Yeah.
But I do think they have a very distinct style that will catch a lot of teams out because they're like, hey, we're going to punish you in the mid game by catching you out or overloading the side lane. Also, I just think Trimby's been a great addition to Heretics. Like, I love the fact he's roaming so much. He's working with Jankos. Like, it feels like they have a solid understanding of how they want to play the early game.
I think that a lot of praise definitely should go to Team Heretics this split. Because obviously, we had Wonderon, really tricky turnaround with the last minute roster changes. The fact that they have done so well is a credit to the team. For kind of turning that around, or what could have been a disastrous situation. And obviously, BDS did fall back on just kind of scaling habits. They had the Orianna, they had the Aphelios, and it was a really creative draft that I was initially skeptical about from Team Heretics. It played out beautifully. The Nocturne Nico combo is lethal. Obviously, one of those ones that we know on paper could be strong, but like it was played to perfection. Just about. I mean, not every fight was perfect, but Spyro especially. I think teams probably just start not giving him Nico because I think on other champs he's looked fine, but on Nico he looks good.
Looks great.
He looks great. Like the reason Fnatic lost, other than their own hubris to Heretics in week 1, is because Spyro and Jankos, for sure, 100%. Also Jankos. Jankos has been like fantastic. Just kept finding picks that Lisa Nico was ruthless. And in this game is a similar story where like this is not, especially given the context of the season change, where I expected to see some mid jungle synergy. Yeah. But they work really well together in fights, man. Yeah. They work super, super well.
But I think that's it. It's like having the newcomer come in, it's very easy to say, hey, follow the veteran, right? Listen to his calls and just whatever he does, you say how high, right? You just want to like go in and get involved, whatever, jump. But it's as you...
Feed, how high? Push, how high?
But I do think it works out where it's like, this is... Especially when you have Trimby that's roaming a ton around the mid lane, it gives you a lot of security there as Viro to just like, hey, I'm going to scale into it.
Yeah.
But also coming back to your other point, what I wanted to talk about was I'm kind of frustrated to not see more of these like combos coming out of LEC. Like Nico Nocturne has been an insane combo for a long, long time. And like it's still, as you see, looks very, very strong. It's frustrating to see teams like not be willing to play Ashe Varus, because that's going to be such a massive thing when we get to internationals. And I know the teams are like, hey, we don't really know how to like push lanes into invade, into like playing for a jungler off of Ashe Varus or like playing for what this needs. But it does frustrate me because it's like we see these combos that are so incredibly strong in other regions, but we just haven't really been willing to integrate them into our system.
So I'm with you.
For the first one.
On Nocturne Nico. I'm with you on these champions with clear ultimate synergies where it is easy to get players to coordinate and there's very clear power points to play around. Yeah. I think some of those things are also true for combos like Ashe Varus. I think the difference is there is not a consistent burden of execution on Nocturne Nico.
Yeah.
Like, you need to have a couple good moments on Nocturne Nico. You need to be good in the fights, and you need not to gratuitously feed, right, to make this combo work. Ashe Varus, every second of your game has to be good, which is a bit hyperbolic, but almost every second of your game has to be good, because once that starts to fall apart, or once your team isn't making the most out of that lane priority and the enemy gets more reliable engaged because they don't have Ashe Varus, right? They have some other shit. Wow, I'm swearing a lot today. Sorry, team. Not that you guys asked me to keep it wholesome, but I would like to keep it wholesome. It just falls apart. And we saw this with, Giant X, and I appreciate that they want to try these more fragile compositions, let's call them, a little more glass cannon-y. But if you do anything wrong, if your jungler dies for no reason, even if you play great and someone else on your team messes up, it's so easy for this to fall apart. And I'm just like, I'm worried about being exposed to it, but I also think like baby steps, Rob. Baby steps. I think like let's start with more people playing Nocturne Nico, or more kind of solid interactions like that are easier to get value out of. Let's work our way up to Ashe Varus.
I'll bring back like where my head is at for the reasoning behind this is I want to see more teams like playing around jungle. Because like we have some super carry junglers. Like Yike was a massive Kha'Zix player coming into the league. Can play a ton of like Bel'Veth and all this kind of stuff.
I mean, Yike, Bo, Yanko, Yo-Yo, Razork, like those 5 alone before and there are other players who I think maybe their team style or personal style doesn't fit as well. But if I just bam, 5 off the top of my head, not thinking about anyone else, all of those players can carry a game.
Exactly. And I think this is where it's like, I would love to be able to see a team, and I think Mad Lions are going to take out of this conversation because I actually think they do try and play around Oyoya. I think they're the one team that actually like tries to play for jungle. Yeah. But it does seem a little bit, and I think G2 with like the Lee Sin Aries and stuff are trying to play a little bit more.
I feel like they play for mid. I feel like they're just playing for
It is kind of more, so
I think, and then to be fair, Fnatic had that game where they played for Razork, and then that was the game they threw against Team Heretics, where they really like Razork. They set up Razork for success. Razork then converted that success into Oscar into success, and then 1 million people didn't count the minions and died over and over again. That's the long and short of that game.
Yeah, but I think it's like, it is a little bit, and I think, then coming back to the reason I think these combos are strong is like the Nocturne Nico gives you set up to be like, hey, our jungler is going to get fed off of Nico. Now the jungler will be the carry. Or when I look at, we're seeing Ahri Lee Sin, but Ahri Viego, Ahri Xin Zhao, like these are, or Nico Xin Zhao, or basically CC plus damage from your jungler. Yeah. I think this is where, okay, now we can play for, we will push, we will invade into the enemy jungle, we will start to set up our jungler to take over the game. And I think when you look at a lot of LCK and LPL, this is what we're seeing a lot is, hey, we're actually going to use jungler as our linchpin for this game. And it, like, you'll see it with I don't know if how many people watch LPL, but like Milky Way and FPX, new rookie jungler that is an absolute monster.
I was gonna say this is tough because Milky Way is like the hypest new player ever. Do you have like, is there a pleb example, Rob? Because if you haven't heard about Milky Way is insane, and you're gonna hear about Milky Way more.
All right, and then bringing it back, it's like JDG Kanavi.
Okay, right? Yeah, a pleb jungler for sure. No, why? Stop listing like top 3 in their position globally. The normies need to know they can do it too, Rob. No, but continue your point. Sorry, I was just thinking. I was like, it's a bit of a harder sell when you're listing only like the best in their respective positions. Sorry, continue on your continue Milky Way or Kanavi.
Yeah, but it's like, I think it's more the idea of, hey, these are teams that understand, I will play, Yagao plays any mid to go like, I will just point and click CC to set up Kanavi to be a carry, right? And I think this is where I want to see a little bit more of that execution coming through in Europe as well, which is,
I like that.
And like where Ashe Varus is coming from in my head is, hey, you can play for push, but then also, I'm going to go and invade on this bottom side now that I have this push, or I'm going to like use the lane pressure that I have to set up for jungle success. And I think it's a bit sad that we don't get it as much, because I think we have a lot of sick junglers. As you said, you've already named 5 off the top of your head, but like pretty much like across the board, like these are guys that can actually set up and be massive carries, right? And I think if you enable them, I think it unlocks then like a new way of playing the game. But I think it is a little bit of, coming back to like our BDS conversation, is like, you have to be willing to break the mold, lose a little bit, learn from your mistakes if you want to try and be able to do that. But I think teams are kind of like solidifying almost like a band-aid of, hey, this is how we want to play the game because we've only got 3 weeks. And maybe it is a symptom of the structure of the way the league is set up.
Yeah.
But it does feel like a lot of teams are like unwilling to try things or like expand or, you know, attack a different way.
A tale as old as time.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like it's always been tricky, regardless of format, to be fair. Because even in best of one, we're like, people need to try more. They're like, give us best of three. We watched best of three in like 2016, 2017. People did not cook more. People just copied more drafts from the LCK.
Yeah.
Like, it's so hard. I don't think it's like one. It's definitely not just one thing. And I think that it's a problem that has been there for quite some time. Maybe always, but as long as we've had like formal structure and at least LEC or European esports, I feel like European League of Legends esports, this has been an issue.
Yep.
Teams don't feel comfortable to really like. There are some exceptions, obviously, depending on the meta, right? Where like if there's a meta where counter picks are really important, I think teams are willing to do more. But if there's not a clear value proposition, teams are always just so hesitant to try new things. That said, while we've talked a lot about teams that are struggling, while we've talked a lot about kind of teams across the top and the bottom of the table, we wanted to take to the streets, and by the streets I mean X and YouTube, to get some input from our community on who the unsung heroes of our league are. I'll go for the fun one first because we already talked about it a little bit. Swiffer, his mental, unstoppable. It's kind of a meme, but I think that I love, just as a side note, I love Swiffer's reaction cams. I'm not going to say that like Swiffer is the unsung hero more than any other coach or coaching staff.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who call that coaching staff. I'm not there every day in scrims to tell you what Swiffer does or doesn't do. But in general, let's all just give our shout outs to our coaches who do their best to walk on stage after they watch their team mess up a play that they made 100 times correctly in spring or in scrims, you know, like they have to be the adult in the room. And I think that job is really hard sometimes. So shout out to Swiffer, because based on his coach reaction cams, we all get to see that. But I want to be clear, that's every coach. Some are just more willing to hide it.
Yeah.
I think Swiffer's playing into it now because it bangs. It's good content. But
Yeah.
every coach feels that way.
The first one that we popped up where you just see it's like spittle flying from
Where it's just clearly swearing profusely. I can hear his Australian accent just playing in my head. Great content.
Yeah.
But shout out to the coaches in general. Shout out to Swiffer, shout out to the coaches in general. Keep the mental strong. Obviously, so infuriating, and I imagine incredibly stressful. It's like, you know, you train your kids as best as you can, but then you send them out into the world, and they're going to make their own mistakes. Except in this case, you're paid to train your children, and if they make mistakes, you lose your job. So tough being a coach. That's all I'll say. If they make too many whoopsies, even if you trained them right, you might be first on the chopping block there, bro. So shout out to the coaches.
It's like, don't overfill the water. Don't overfill the water. Yeah. And next thing you know, there's just water everywhere.
Yeah. Also, that came from YouTube user @RiseOfPerfection. There were many people who pointed out Swiffer's mental, though. But that's the one we clipped out.
Yeah. I mean, we can also go into Muggenstein's bad future at 70sad on X. Let's have the Daglas conversation, because I saw this one thrown around a lot.
Yeah, people really vibing on Daglas after week 2.
I was like, I think he has had some good moments, but I wouldn't say to like a massive extent he's the unsung hero. I still think he's trying to find his footing a lot. And even when you look at like, there's a lot of combos that we're seeing, which is kind of coming back to what we're talking about, like to have him set up to succeed, right? So it's like, hey, we're going to play for Ari plus damage. Cool. We're going to take the Jax and try and set you up for success. It's Ari plus Viego, same idea. Talia Vi, instead, he's the one that's trying to set up for point and click CC into the Talia knockback, right? And I think that's kind of where they found success is, hey, we're going to play for this like 1-2 punch. But I still think it's like when I look at who I expect to be the carries on Vitality, I'm still looking at Photon or Carsey, like almost 100% of the time. And a lot of the times I do think that it's Photon finding these good counterpick matchups that are giving them, like if I look at the games they've won, right? There was the massive Rumble one. There was the TF that he ended up getting countered on, but the massive Rumble one. There was also the Wukong one against the Jace where he was able to find the counterpick. There's the Gwen into the Cassante, which was against Rogue, where actually maybe he didn't have the best of times. Maybe I'm getting mixed up in my head. But either way, I still think there's like Photon getting a lot of control in the side lane, opening up them for them to collapse onto mid and then find a pick or find a team fight, something along those lines, right? I think Daglas is
doing okay. I think he is getting better. I think that he had a really impressive Jax performance He's had some solid games, but I think that right now Daglas still feels like a passenger in someone else's game plan rather than like master of his own domain when it comes to early game, etc.
And that's the thing. I think there's like certain things that I look out for a jungler is like, hey, how do you operate on the map? Are you aware of this is a potential timer where some like my bot lane or my top lane, because of a crash, could be under threat? It's like, have you edited your jungle pathing to go and be there? And I don't really see that a huge amount from Daglas, where he's like, oh, I'm going to go and like shadow my top lane so Photon doesn't have to overextend in this wave. Yeah. Or it kind of feels more like, as I say, I have done my pathing. I am now here and I think I can make a gank happen versus like planning 2 to 3 steps ahead. And I think that's where you get to see like the big evolution in a jungler is when they get to that level. Yeah. And I don't think Daglas is quite there. Not that he won't get there. And I just think it's like he just needs a little bit more time.
We haven't even seen it on stage. And I mean, just to like put it simply, I don't want to drag Daglas too much because I think he's a new player. You know, he hasn't offended anybody. No one's telling me the best.
And I don't think he's doing bad is the thing.
But that's the thing is I think it's important to be realistic here. It's like expectations are not high for Daglas, and he is not, outside of a few games here and there, really exceeding those expectations. Or maybe is a little bit, but maybe only because expectations are so low. And it's like, if you really feel like Daglas is an unsung hero, my question to you is like, what do you think that he is providing to this team that feels uniquely Daglas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Like what, because to me right now, he fits in, team is gelling better. I don't know what he's like behind the scenes, but it's like, you could put other junglers in this position and I would feel pretty similarly. Like I wouldn't list Daglas as an MVP. I wouldn't list Daglas as top 5 in his role. And so I want to see Daglas grow. I believe that there's some exciting stuff there. I loved the Jax game. I've loved some of the games that he's played as well. The brand was obviously sick for the couple weeks that it was OP and he was able to play it. He played it well. It wasn't just that it was OP. But like, he's just not there yet.
Yeah.
He's not that guy yet. And we'll see where he ends up. But I think that I get why people are excited because some of those games were flashy. The Jax game was flashy. It was sick. He deserves credit for that. But, slow down a little bit on Daglas. Let's not counter chickens before they catch. Like compare him to an Alvaro, compare him to some of the rookies that we've seen in terms of individual performances and like strong performances, and just understand that like the competition is tight for these for positions where you can be like praised for really changing the way your team plays a game, because there are some players that are like single-handedly changing their teams, and right now he's not one of those players.
I also think trying to propel him does him a disservice as well. Because if you try and like shove him up onto this pedestal, it's not only a fact of like, I don't think he's ready. It's also, I don't think this team is ready. I don't think this team understands how it wants to play, to give Daglas a direction of, hey, this is what we'd like you to do in the early stages. So I think trying to push him up onto this pedestal only ends up hurting him, because then inevitably, because the team isn't really sure what they want to do, he will end up not being able to provide the high expectations you're putting on him, and then everyone's going to turn on him. So I don't think it's fair to do it to him either.
Yeah, I don't think the team is putting those expectations on him. I'm sure that they feel like he's doing well and he's getting better.
From a fan perspective.
No, sure. And I think it's just always important to remember that even if you really like a player, don't oversell them, because you are just doing them a disservice in the long run. It makes it so much less special when they do pop off and do something truly great. You can say you always believed in them, but don't tell me that they were always this good, because that's not true, and that's disrespectful to the work that they put in to go from, let's say, solid, where Daglas is now, to truly great, right? Because when he does get there, if you're like, he's always been here, it's like, well, now you just undermine this massive achievement and this growth that he had to put himself, if he can, get to the top of the table or become one of the best junglers in our league. But he's not there yet. Next up, also coming from YouTube, definitely snipping tool that one too small into the document, Mr. Italian. Mr.
I think you're right.
Italian. Anyway, Patrick. People have been sleeping on him for years, but he's really good, and only the peacekeeping XL Giants afloat, kind of, in parentheses. We'll keep this one tight because we've gone a little, I'll keep this one succinct, I think, because we have a couple more to get through. But this is what I'll say about Patrick. Patrick has been the shining light of Giants for like a million years, and it has never gotten them anywhere. And that's not to disparage Patrick. Even this split, we saw him and Ignar, the game where they roamed top. You and Medic casted it. I love the cast. You broke it down so well. Hiding in the bush, baiting so the enemy team would back, assuming they were resetting, and then they move in and get 2 plates, and then they reset and they go get dragged. Like, oh, they're so clean with it sometimes. But it hasn't transitioned to a lot. So I don't think that it's Patrick as an unsung hero. I think we've been singing about Patrick for years. It's just people are tired, I think, of hearing about it because it doesn't manifests into results. I feel like Patrick has been probably the best player on Excel in 90% of their rosters, if not all of them. But it hasn't mattered. Like when you talk to ADs, people bring up Patrick all the time about him being, one of the top in his position. In some years he's higher, some years he's lower, but like he's consistently talked about. But right now, I don't know if people are gonna like this comparison, but I feel like he's the nuke duck of AD. Like I hear people talk about, in scrims, he's such a smart player, he's and then it's like, but he's not winning, right? And it's not entirely on him. There's a lot of things going on in Giant X that are difficult. Peach is definitely struggling. A lot of unnecessary deaths. They're trying to play really hard compositions, but I think Patrick is doing well individually. So if you are just joining the league this year and you're not very familiar with Patrick, you can call him an unsung hero. But I think the problem is, again, we've sung about Patrick for many years.
Yeah, he's been sung about for many years, and also Giant X are to float. So they're very much looking like they could easily be knocked out here and not even make the playoffs. And
yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second when we get to predictions for who's not going to make it. Spoiler, Rogue and Giants are the easy selection because they only have one win, but we'll talk about it a little bit more for the final week schedule. Our last one. So many fans have asked. Would not be surprised if many of them are Fnatic fans. We'll just give it a moment so everyone can appreciate the sheer quantity of comments that have come in for this particular player.
How about being impartial and show whom week 2 went 3-0? I mean, you did it for G2, then you'll have it at Caps. Why not do it for Fnatic? Wait, I know, because you're not impartial about it.
It is Jun. Damn, people love Jun. And I want to be clear, I think Jun's playing well. I think that he is being eclipsed by the fact that Razork and Humanoid are playing like absolute demons, but like, Jun is doing well.
Yeah, I do think there is a little bit of like Jun being the one holding the palette that Humanoid and Razork are standing on. Because I actually agree with a lot of it. There's a very clear game plan for Fnatic, which is we are going to play around Humanoid, and then Humanoid is very nice, and then he plays around bot lane. And I think it's very easy to see that style. And I think a lot of it is actually coming from, well, yes, Razork, because Razork does the flashy plays, and we get to see that a little bit more. And I think a lot more in winter, it was the solo Razork and Humanoid story. But I do actually think coming into this split, Jun has become more of the part of that.
Yeah.
Where he's kind of become part of the cool kids club, which is where he works with Razork. He often tries to gank on mid. Like you'll have him on the rel, for instance, consistently roaming towards the mid lane. He's setting up the vision that allows Razork to then go for these plays as well. And there is significantly more work between the two of them. And then it is a case of, well, Humanoid then plays that back out into bot lane, right?
Yeah.
And I think the reason that he doesn't get the props that he probably deserves is because so often in winter it was just Humanoid and Razork doing the play, or for a long time in Fnatic it has been Humanoid and Razork doing the play. But I think it's also then it's like 70% of the time Jun is there, but you'll still see that against G2 it was Ahri and the Poppy and the Taliyah outplaying the Ahri and the Lee Sin, right? And that's where holy crap, it's Humanoid and Razork again. And I think he kind of gets left out of that conversation at times. Mm-hmm. But I do think he's playing incredibly well. And the amount of time, the roam timings are incredibly good. The ability to actually play
roam timings. When he resets, I feel like he always picks the right lane to be in, 100%. Which is an underrated skill. There are so many times where someone is going to try to overforce a gank on mid lane, and then Jun is just there right when he needs to be, or overforce a play on top side, and Jun is there right where he needs to be. And so I think Jun as an individual is doing really well. Like you highlighted, I think that there's still some time that's going to be needed to grow until him and Razork are because what I think you dream of when you have a support and jungler is that you do not get to talk about them in isolation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right? There is no way you can talk about Razork without talking about Jun. And we're not quite there yet. And certainly even this split, I don't know if you would talk about Yike and Mickey in the same context. In mid game, surely you would. But in early game, it's not really clearly they're playing around mid. But I think that's the dream when you talk about teams working together, is that when you talk about the early game, you just make this Razork Jun amalgamation.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just you cannot discuss it without discussing them combined rather than each of them individually. I think Jun is good. He's not the flashiest big playmaker. I think he does his role well. I think the biggest way that he contributes is he moves around the map well. You highlighted, he plays his vision well. He uses his pressure well. He is a player that I imagine, even when this stuff gets better, will go under the radar, because we have players, Mickey not so much recently, he's definitely had his moments, but Alvaro last split, all-star engages. Targamas in the KC game where Sikin was playing Ahri. Again, all-star engages. These really flashy supports who are clearly just styling. Like, that's always going to be the kind of player that's going to grab your attention. And Jun has not been that kind of player. Not that he hasn't had a couple games where that's been the case, but most of what I look at him for, and it sounds like what you look at him for, is his contributions to map movement, vision, leveraging existing strengths on the map. Like, he's doing his job incredibly well. It's just not the flashiest job.
I think he's like one of the best we have at fundamentals. And I think that's where like Fnatic are getting to shine, where he creates the box that Fnatic gets to play in, essentially. And I think that's and as you say, the reason he goes unsung is it's not the flashy engages, but it's I'm in the right place and I've hit my Q and I've hit my W on Rel, but I'm not doing the flash in Magnet Storm 5-man ults quite yet, right? Yeah. And I think he can get to that stage, but I also think it's kind of difficult because, of course, there is still a little bit of a language barrier. Yeah. And oftentimes when you like look at a player like that, it's like, I'm going, or they just yell, I've got the moment, or I'm looking, or whatever it is, that communication is there. So maybe, I don't know, with time, but I definitely think fundamentally he is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest supports we have. Where it's like trying to set up. I think the other one, well, I do think so.
Not the strongest. That's a bolder discussion. Do we have time for that discussion? Because like Mickey and Alvaro, I still look at as two of our best, even with MDK struggling.
I think you pointed out is like I don't look at Mickey in the early game as like a massive roaming threat at the moment, right? He's not linking up with Yike in the same way. I think Alvaro was also in that discussion, right? But I do think it's like when you actually look at how well Jun links with, I think also Trimby's in that conversation, specifically for early game. Where it's like
I'm mad at him.
Trimby, Yankos, really, really good at linking up together. They are going to like shift around the map together and work well. Alvaro goes for the invades with Oyori and sets up the vision for him. And then I think it's Jun, right? And I think it's those three that I specifically, and Labrov to a certain extent, but not as heavily with Sheo. But it's like,
I'm talking about Labrov right now. He's got to redeem himself in week 3 before we can talk about Labrov again. But historically, I'm with you.
Yeah, but those three are definitely the guys where I'm like, you work with your jungler and you have an understanding of how to support them, how to get the vision control that you need, and then how to play for elsewhere on the map that is not a bot lane moment. And I think Mickey's very good at, when he's on point, which I think he's a little bit off at the moment, is I'm going to work onto bot lane dives. I'm going to dominate in the 2v2, but less so hey, I'm going to like work with Yike consistently to make mid plays, to like invade on jungle and that kind of stuff.
I will say, like in the MDK game that G2 played, he hit literally every Melio Q. The Kog'Maw game, like they looked really good, and I think that he has been playing he played some defensive picks. They've been playing Smolder lanes, so I still think Mickey has it in him, right? I just don't know if he's had the chance to shine in the same way.
Well, I think it's like I'm not saying the thought process here is not. It's your approach to playing support, because like. I think Mickey, if we're talking about a 2v2 dominating lane, Mickey is the support that I want. But if I am looking for a roaming support that is getting out on the map, I want Trimby. And it's like, or I want Jun, or I want someone along these lines, right? Where I think it's like, it's in a different approach to the game. And there's no correct way to play it. But it's like a decision that this team has made of, on Fnatic, we are going to play from bot with Jun, with Razork towards mid. We get to play mid, we then move back into bot lane and we try and win out bot lane then from that way. When you look at with Elyoya and Alvaro, it's we're going to push bot into invade and we're going to play for Elyoya in that way with Alvaro, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when I look at G2, it's like, come boss, you're playing for boss. Yeah. And I think that's the difference, where it's like you will see Mickey and Yike on the same screen, right? But it's not a conscious decision of we are linking up off of this timing window that I've created in bot lane as a support to then go and do something elsewhere on the map. And I think that's the difference there for me.
Interesting. I'm going to keep an eye out for that this weekend. I'm curious to see it because I feel what you're saying about Jun. I'm really amped up about Jun right now. And Trimmy's a good shout out too. I don't know if we talked about him enough in the Team Heretics, but he's doing good. Mm-hmm. I hate Thresh, but he made Thresh work in that one game.
How dare you?
Thresh is useless.
I love Thresh.
We can have this conversation when we can get more supports on the show because you love Thresh on a personal level, and I hate Thresh on a personal level. And analytically, there's a lot to be said there. But we're just going to shout at each other. Yeah. So I want to get a non-biased third party to mediate our Thresh love/hate discussion. In the meantime, it is the final week of LEC spring regular season. There are only 3 weeks. We need to talk about who's missing playoffs. Remember, 8 teams make it in, 2 teams make it out. Currently at the bottom of the standings, Giant X and Rogue. But only one win above them is KC and Mad Lions Koi. So it's not maybe as clear cut as it should feel at this point. Again, only had 3 wins is SK Gaming and TBDS. So really, it's only our top 4 that feel almost guaranteed to get in. Our top 2 are already locked. Of course, that's G2 and Fnatic. But importantly, day 1, Friday, Saturday, Monday this week, by the way. I'll mention it again at the end of the episode, but Friday, Saturday, Monday, Sunday, we don't have a show. Friday, Giant X versus Rogue, our first game. It feels like winner has hope for the rest of the weekend. They're definitely not in, but they have hope, and loser is just done.
I was going to say, so I actually think if Rogue win that game, there is a chance that Rogue can like climb them, a fairly high chance that Rogue can climb themselves out of it. Because they do have G2. Sorry, you're not winning that game. They're against SK though on their last day, which with the way SK are playing is hyper winnable for Rogue. Like they could very easily pick up that game. If
Rogue don't draft for winning lanes or whatever, please stop drafting early game stuff for bot lane, please. Please. It is the peak, I think, of ego to draft Lucian Nami when your team has been drafting early game focused stuff the entire season and getting blasted in lane. Most lanes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Don't like it. Anyway, if they just draft a little, like, I think you're at the point where if you play against SK, you're just like, give me a backup scaling option and pray that they throw again. And I don't think it's unreasonable, especially when you look at SK's schedule, because it's like SK has to play Fnatic and G2, 2 teams who are already locked. And we heard from Swiffer, as the week goes on, if you're losing games, you start to lose confidence. It's like, you're expected to lose those first 2 games. SK's confidence is going to be an all-time low. Rogue are going to lose a game they expect to lose.
Yeah.
And if they beat GX, there's a world where Rogue makes it in.
100%. Because that's the thing is like, so the other teams they're competing against are Karmine Corp and Mad Lions Koi, right?
Yeah.
MDK play Heretics, BDS, and Fnatic. Which is not a fun time.
Rogue have a comparatively easy schedule.
Exactly. And then you look across at Karmine Corp as well. Vitality, bit up in the air.
Yeah, Team Heretics, BDS.
And then BDS. So like, I think
KC gets probably a win. You expect them maybe to win over BDS?
Like I was going to say, I think Heretics look pretty reliable.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that is going to be a tough game for Karmine Corp. BDS as well, if they're playing for this team fight style, back to their old ways, that's going to be tough.
I think that BDS have a fake scoreline right now. They have won at least 2 games that they had absolutely no business winning. And credit to them for finding the angle to come back. But like, I think BDS are much worse than their 3-3 scoreline would indicate. And so for me, it's like, if Mad Lions Koi are going to cinch it, it is over the body of BDS, most certainly, as I think that the rest of their matchups are much harder. But if KC are going to do it, it's also BDS. Like, I think the volatile pieces in this puzzle right now are SK and BDS, because they're both 3-3, but both of them super, super unreliable. BDS has gotten a couple comebacks that they probably shouldn't have gotten, and SK has thrown a ton of games that they should have gotten. So it's like, the middle of our table is so unreliable that if you play the people around you or the middle of the table, I'm like, you've still got a shot, even if you only have one right now. That said, I think Giant X are just dead, dude.
Yeah.
I think it's done.
I mean, Vitality and Heretics is a tough one for them. And I haven't seen anything that looks consistent enough. Like, I think with Rogue, I've seen their early game is decent. It's transitioning that into a win is where the problems start to come in. But for Giant X, I don't even see them getting the early control to then go, we're going to like now have a time in the mid game.
Yeah.
And it just feels so disjointed for Giant X, where I'm just like, I just don't have any faith that they'll be able to pick up the win that they need.
They've drafted harder compositions. They lost that game to BDS that they were absolutely winning, and then they took a fight at Dragon at like 14 minutes where Adam gets like the perfect ult, and GX are just completely desynced on when Oda's going to get there with his TP, and they just get embarrassed in that fight and the game just ends.
Yeah.
And then BDS just make picks in mid the rest of the game. Like, there's so many moments where it looks like, GX are like decently in control and it falls apart. That said, like, the only thing that really puts them above Rogue, or the only thing that Rogue puts them above them, is the fact that they face SK, and like, generally, I think there have been... Actually, who am I kidding? They're both a mess. They're both a hot mess. It's literally only the fact that Rogue has SK in their schedule, and if they beat Giant X, like that's your upset. That's your upset. But both of these teams probably shouldn't make playoffs, but they could, and that's what's kind of crazy about this coming week.
Well, the thing is, I think the hot take is that Karmine Corp don't make it.
You think Karmine Corp don't make it?
So the thing is,
2 wins. It's not that hot of a take now that I think about it, but that's fair.
But the thing is, it's like, do I actually fully believe that they will beat Vitality, Heretics, or BDS. I think maybe BDS.
BDS is believable.
Yeah. But like, if they don't pick up a win, Rogue have the head-to-head. So if Rogue beats Giant X and everyone just stays on 2 wins, Rogue go through.
I have to double check the tiebreaker rules. I always forget in the single.
Oh no, we don't play tiebreaker. Oh, we have to play tiebreaker.
We have to play a tiebreaker because there's only one head-to-head. Right. So, but even forcing the tiebreaker is spicy, right? Because that's not a position you kind of expect Rogue to be in based on their start to the season. Yeah, Casey. The other thing we have to call out is like we're giving Vitality the benefit of the doubt, but as we mentioned previously, it is a flip some days. Yeah. So while SK are a flip, but they don't get the benefit of the doubt right now because they just haven't closed games. Vitality are flipping, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt because on paper they should beat every single team on their schedule except for G2. They should get 2 wins this week and be fine. They should end the season 6-3. You know, losing to G2, beating GX on day 2, beating KC on day 1. Should be clean, clear, simple. Team Heretics, same thing. Should beat MDK. Actually, I don't know. MDK is the one where I feel like they are making playoffs for sure, but that's the long shot prediction. Like if you could spin me a tale about how MDK would get knocked out, and it's plausible, is what I will say, because they have not been good. They have not been reliable. Yeah. And I think that if we're gonna doom and gloom on SK, we have to share a little bit of that with MDK because they are not that far off and have a worse record. So
it's so hard. Like, again, it's because they're going up against teams that are so inconsistent in themselves. It's impossible to kind of... I think the one I agree with is Giant X more than likely out.
Yep. Everything else. But if we assume Giant X loses, it gets Rogue 2 wins and they're basically tied, and then it's kind of anyone's game.
Yeah, I think it's obviously more of an uphill battle for Rogue because they have to pick up at least 2 wins. So they have to beat Giant X and then either SK or, well, G2 they're not going to beat. So it's like...
You would assume. It is G2 and they've already lost.
They did lose them in winter as well, didn't they? Yeah, so God only knows. But
that is the problem with the top of our table is that sometimes they just do a little
They have a happy game. They have a
happy little happy game. Yeah, it's up in the air, guys. Everyone... There are 4 teams that are making it for sure, I think. Fnatic, G2, Team Heretics, Team Vitality, based on scoreline.
To summarize, everyone beats everyone, G2 go to MSI.
Everyone beats everyone, G2 and someone else go to MSI, and Giant X aren't going to make it. That's all we know for sure. Everything else is up in the air. If you want to see how it unfolds, of course, Friday, Saturday, Monday this week, starting at the regular time. Remember, transition times are tight, so get in there. It's a blitz of a day, usually done by 9 p.m. Days are fast. We'll see who comes out on top. This has been Euphoria Episode 8. I'm Drakos, that's Rob. Friday, Saturday, Monday. You'll forget. You'll tweet. Don't do it. Just be there. And to all the people who said, talk about Jun. Jun's doing great. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate you.
Bye.
Bye.